to Excel and the Power Query Editor. Oh, and Power Pivot as well. My name is Jessica Jolly, and I am delighted to have you with me today. Let's talk about our agenda. In part 1, we will answer some basic questions about the Power Query Editor. In part 2, we will explore the Power Query Editor and its close cousin, Power Pivot. Part 3 will be all about data models, what they are, how to create one, and understanding relationships. Along the way, we will touch on tables in Excel, applied steps in the M language, bringing data in from a blank Excel workbook and from a workbook with data already in it, copying and pasting from the advanced editor, relationships between tables, and a bunch of fun GIFs. Are you ready? I hope so, because we're about to do this together. Let's go. Let's start by accessing the Power Query Editor from Excel. But before I even do that, I want to make sure you have an orientation to the worksheet I'm going to be using. Column A has a list of fake companies. Column B has their IDs. Here is a list of dates, and these are the number of incidents each fake company incurred that week. And these are the sums for each column. Now let's access the Power Query Editor. The first thing we do is go to the Data tab. Then we go to Get Data all the way on the left-hand side of the ribbon. There are a lot of options for getting data here. We're just going to use Excel, but take time to look at all of them. I can also open the Power Query Editor from this menu. In this situation, I'm just going to use Excel, so I'm going to go find it in my list of files. And now it will open up the Navigator pane. Once you select an item, it will show you a preview of the contents, so you know you're picking the right one. And then you click the Transform option. Because this is the first time we are in the Power Query Editor, let me give you a guided tour. Here's the formula bar, just like in Excel. What you see there is the M language. Let's open the Query panel on the left. This shows you the queries you've imported. And here is the data in the selected query. Over here on the right is the Applied Steps panel, which is nothing short of magic in my opinion. It keeps track of every step you take as you transform your data, almost like the macro recorder in Excel. Okay, now we've had our general orientation to the Power Query Editor. Let's keep going. Here I have that quality set that I showed you already in the editor. But just for practice, I want to bring the data in again so you can see that again. First, I make sure I am on the Data tab. Then I go to Get Data. Then I choose From File, then From Workbook. I find the file I want and select it. This workbook only has one worksheet, but if I had more than one worksheet, they would be listed here. And then I choose Transform to take the data directly into the Power Query Editor. When you first start using the Power Query Editor, it can be confusing to tell where you are. So if in doubt, look up in the upper left-hand corner. The first thing I need to do is get titles into the top row. I choose Use First Row as headers, and it's done. Notice that the Applied Steps panel has recorded that step. Next, I need to remove the Summary row. I choose Remove Rows, and then I enter the number 1 to indicate I just want to eliminate the top row. Now I want to clean up my column headers. I can just double-click into the header like I would in Excel and change the name of the column. Let's take a look at the vendor ID column. My data type for vendor ID is not consistent. I choose the Transform tab and select Data Type. There are a lot of different options to choose from, and I choose Text. Let's take a quick look at our Applied Steps panel. It's been diligently recording every step we've taken. Now I want to show you one of the coolest transformations there is. First, I select the first two columns. Then, are you ready? I select Unpivot Other Columns. Boom! My data has been rearranged so that I have one row for each company for each day. Exactly the format I need for a pivot table. Now let's take it back to Excel. I go to the Home tab, the Close and Load menu, choose Close and Load, and that will take me back into Excel with a new worksheet with the transformed data in it. So let's recap. We opened a blank Excel file, we launched the Power Query Editor, we imported data from an Excel workbook, performed some transformations, then brought that data back into Excel. We can also start from a file that already has data in it. We go to the Data tab, and then we use the Table/Range option, and Excel shows us our data range. But how did Excel know what my data range was? Excel performs a scan, up and down, left and right, looking for any all blank row or all blank columns. So the answer is never have a blank row or an all blank column. And now back to our regularly scheduled program. Back to our data, here it is. We're going to click OK, and that's going to take that set of data into the Power Query Editor where we can transform it. If you click on your Excel icon, you'll see that you have two windows open. One is the original Excel file, and the other is the Power Query Editor window. But you can't toggle back and forth between the two of them, even though it looks like you ought to be able to. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward through this set of transformations. Don't worry, you already saw these. But while we're watching them performed at a high rate of speed here, let me just say that I'm only showing you the tip of the iceberg in terms of what you can do with the Power Query Editor. Now I'm going to close and load, and it's going to take us right back into Excel. You're going to see that I have a new worksheet with the transformed data, and it's called Sheet 1. And I have my query panel over on the right hand side, and this is the original data. So I have two worksheets, and the transformed data that I brought back is just like regular data in Excel, and I can use it in the same way I would use any regular data in Excel. And now it's time for a little bit of magic. Are you ready? I hope so. We're back in the Power Query Editor. And over here on the right, I have my Applied Steps pane showing all the steps we've taken to this point. I'm going to go up to the Home tab and choose Advanced Editor, which is going to open up a new dialog box, which has language written in what's called M. Let's take a closer look. It first starts with a let statement. Then it declares the source of the data. Every line except the last one ends with a comma. Each step is named with a hashtag. The last line only does not have a comma, and then it ends with an in statement. That's a simple view. I'm going to copy the M script that we created through those transformations, and I'm going to paste it into a Word document. In this case, I'm just using Notepad. I'll close up that file, open up a new file that has the exact same data in Power Query Editor, but I don't have any of the transformations performed, and I want to do exactly the same thing on this file. So I'm going to copy that M script from wherever I put it, in this case Notepad, and I'm going to go to Advanced Editor, Open it up, and I'm going to delete anything that's specific just to this file. So I'm going to delete those lines there. Then I'm going to copy in my script, and then I'm going to delete any duplications or redundancies. And once that's done, I hit done. Are you ready? Those transformations are complete. I know. Whoa. They're all done that fast. All right. Let's move on to part 2, in which we talk about the Power Query Editor and its close cousin, Power Pivot. Here I have an Excel file. It's called the Northwind file, and it has a bunch of worksheets, each with data pertaining to the Northwind orders. If I want to analyze this data, I can create a pivot table for each worksheet. You've probably made a million pivot tables. There's nothing new here, right? But when you use Power Pivot, you can use as many tables as you want in a pivot table. I know. Whoa. So let's do just that, shall we? Here I have a blank file. And I'm going to go to Get Data, from File, from Workbook. I'm going to find my Northwind data, the one I just showed you. I'm going to import it. Now notice here that I have several options. Because the worksheets are formatted as tables, I see both the table name and the worksheet name. I'm going to choose multiple items, and I'm going to select each of the worksheets. And I'm going to come down and hit Transform Data, which means I'm going to go into the Power Query Editor first. Now, I'm going to go through these transformations fast, but don't worry, because we'll come back to these. Again, I want to show you this as many times as I can so you get the sense of the rhythm of the workflow that's involved. And as I said, we'll go back through these slow in a minute. So don't worry that I haven't shown this to you in detail. I love this speeded up version. I wish I could make that happen in real life. Okay, we're all done with those transformations. And let's get back to Excel. So I'm going to go to Close and Load. Notice there's two options. I'm going to choose Close and Load. And this is going to take me back into Excel. Here's all our worksheets and queries. And now we can create a pivot table. Summarize with pivot table. It's the same dialog box you normally see. You hit OK. But I still only have one table. I need to hit More Tables. And I need to add all my tables to the data model. So what is a data model? A data model is a container, a structure. I like to think of it as something the Container Store would sell, you know, to organize your shoes or your closet or your kitchen. It takes all the different sources of data and enables you to make connections, which are called relationships, between them. In part 3, we will go over this in more detail, and I will show you specific examples. There are several ways to add tables to a data model. The first method is to add tables to the data model from the Pivot Table menu inside Excel. You just saw that one. The second is to add tables to the data model from inside Power Pivot and then create a pivot table. The third is to add tables directly to the data model inside Power Pivot and just create a connection. And of course, at any time, you can access and manage the data model through the Power Pivot menus. I'll show you each of these techniques. But first, I just want to finish up what we were doing. So you can see I've now added all those tables into the pivot table. and I can use them. So while we were on our way to the pivot table, we did some transformations, and I want to go back to them now because I did them super fast, and I promised you I'd slow down. The first thing I'm going to do is delete the column by using remove columns. Then I'm going to promote the first row to be headers. Now I'm going to delete another column, and meanwhile the applied steps are keeping track. I'm going to change the data type to currency. This box just wants to know if I want a separate step, and I didn't. And notice too on the left side I'm picking different queries to do these transformations in. Now I'm going to delete another column because I'm in a different query, and I use the right-click menu. And I'm going to speed through the rest of this, but I'm going to make some comments here. Notice as I go through it, I'm picking different queries on the left-hand side. And also, I can use the right-click menu. I'm not showing that a lot here, but be aware that that's always an option. Now, what I'd like to do is talk about what you can do with transformation. You can create and remove columns or rows, which you've seen me do. You can promote the first row to be a header row, which you saw me do. You can change the data type, pivot and unpivot data. You saw me do both of those things. You can merge two queries together or append a query to another one. You can group rows. You can transpose data, and you can fill in missing values or change values. This is by no means all you can do, but we have to keep going. So let's go back to that data model. I want to go back and show you how we add tables to a data model going through the Power Query Editor. So I'm going to start from the beginning, but I'm going to speed through this. Again, I like to show this to you over and over again just so you get a sense for the rhythm of how this works. So I'm just speeding through all these transformations. These are the same ones you saw before, but done at lightning speed. Again, I wish we could have this in real life. Now I'm going to slow way down, back to normal. And I'm going to go to close and load, and we're going to use close and load 2. And we're going to get this dialog box, and it's going to show us a bunch of options, including add to the data model and create tables. I'm going to hit OK. And now it's going to bring it back into Excel. It's building the data model as we speak. That's what's taking so long. And I will have some tables that I can look at, and my data will be in the data model. The next method I'm going to show bypasses the Power Query Editor. Here's the navigation pane, and notice I'm going to use Load 2. This is going to open up that same dialog box we just looked at, but this time we're only going to create the connection and add to the data model. Now, when we get back into Excel, we're not going to see any worksheets, but we will see our queries because we've only created a connection. Even though you don't see the sheets, your data is in the data model. But I can hear you saying, prove it. So I will. We're going to choose Power Pivot. Quick intermission. If you don't see Power Pivot, you have to go to File, Options, and Add In. Okay, back to regularly scheduled programming. So here we are in Power Pivot, and we're going to use the Manage commands, and that's going to open up the data model. The first couple times you do this, you may get disoriented. So always look up in the upper left hand to make sure where you are. All right, we're going to go to the right-hand side. We're currently in the data view, but we want to see the diagram view. And this will bring up a picture of the data model as it exists today. Each one of the boxes is one of the tables that we brought into the data model. And you can see I'm actually arranging them, so you can rearrange them any way you'd like to. From right here in Power Pivot, I can initiate a pivot table, a chart and a table. So I have a lot of options. I just chose pivot table, and now it's going to ask me if I want it on a new worksheet, which I do. And it takes me back into Excel with all my tables on the right-hand side, and I can click on my queries and look at details of each one. By now you're probably wishing I would just stop. So let me recap. To use multiple worksheets in a pivot table, you have to use Power Pivot. You need to load the queries into the data model. You can go through the Power Query Editor or load the queries directly. You can load each query as a separate worksheet or just create a connection. You can see the data model within Power Pivot. From Power Pivot, you can initiate a pivot table, and that'll take you back to Excel. Okay, let's keep rolling right on into part 3, in which we're going to do a deeper dive into data modeling. Okay, I'm back in Power Pivot in the diagram view looking at the data model. And I'm just going to expand all of these boxes to make sure I can see all the fields. We don't have to do this, but it's just nice to be able to make sure you're seeing everything. Now I need to figure out how these boxes are all connected to each other. So the first clue is looking for fields that have the same name. When I drag from one field to the other, it creates a relationship between the two fields. I just created a relationship on order ID. The 1 on the order side means that the orders table only has one record with that particular order ID. And the star means that the orders detail table has many records with that particular order ID. That's called a one-to-many relationship. I want to create some more relationships, but I seem to be missing some tables. It's very common to have tables hidden over on the right-hand side, so be sure to scroll over when you first bring data into a data model and you start looking at it. Now I'm going to make a relationship between product ID in the product table and product ID in the orders detail table. Next up, I'll make a relationship on category ID between the categories table and the product table. So what happens if a table doesn't have any relationships? Oh, the world ends. No. The only thing that happens is your pivot table doesn't show correct data. Let's do a little more on relationships. I'm going to connect supplier ID in suppliers to supplier ID in the product table. And I also am noticing here that I've got a table that is duplicated. The categories 1 table that you see down there is a duplicate, so I can go ahead and delete it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to select it and right click and delete. And yes, I want to. Alrighty, that's cleaned up. Now I'm going to connect employee ID to employee ID, and then I want to do a little case study about 2 tables. The customer ID field appears in both customers and orders. The customers table holds address data, and the orders table has order data. Unless you connect these 2 tables through the customer ID field, you cannot have a report that shows both an order ID and a customer address. What happens if the field names are different? Can we still connect them through a relationship? Here's a good example. I have this table called shippers and I need to connect it. But to do that, I need to see the underlying data. So I'm going to click on Data View, which is now going to allow me to go look at the data in the shipper table. Here you can see there's a field called Shipper ID with numeric values for each one corresponds to a shipper name. Now let's look at the orders table. We have this field called Ship Via, with the same numeric IDs in it. So we can connect these two fields even though they have a different name. So I'm going to create a relationship between shipper ID and ship via. Okay, up until now we've been doing a lot of prep, but it's all so that we can use multiple worksheets in a pivot table. So let's go do it. I'm back in Excel in the Power Pivot tab, and here's all our active tables. I'm scrolling through so you can see them. So now I'm going to build our pivot table. First, I want to see all the orders filtered by the company name of the shipper. I want the report to list the orders for each customer by customer name. And I keep scrolling. You can see all these tables I have here. Each has a bunch of fields in them. Then I want to use the order ID underneath each company to give me all the order IDs for each company. Now I'm going to scroll a little more and find the country field because I want to list all of these customers by country. So I'm going to drag country down into my columns field. And I want to finish my pivot table by counting the number of orders per customer per country. So I'm just going to drag order ID in again into the values field. And then I have to change it so it doesn't sum it, but it actually counts it. Everything you just saw was brought to you by the data model. I know. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? So let's dig just a little deeper, shall we? And look a little closer. So in this pivot table, I am filtering on the company name field in the shipper table. So how is this working? Well, you remember that I created a relationship between shipper ID and ship via. Because the two tables have a relationship between ship via and shipper ID, order ID and company name are also connected to each other. In the main body of the pivot table, I am grouping order IDs by customer company name, as you can see here as I expand a few of them. The same concept is operating here. Because of a connection on customer ID, order ID and company name also have a connection. I am organizing the orders and the customers by country. Again, the same concept applies. Because customer ID is connected, order ID and country are also connected. So that's a lot of material. Let's recap, shall we? First, the data model is a way to organize and connect data that is not in the same table or worksheet. You access the data model in the Power Pivot menu. Once a table is in the data model, you have to create relationships between it for it to work. You can create a relationship between fields with different names if they have the same data. The most common type of relationship is a one-to-many. And if a table has no relationships, you can't use it in a pivot table because the data will be incorrect. Okay, let's wrap this up. First, the Power Query Editor is a powerful tool you can use. You get it through the Data tab, Get Data command. You can quickly shape your data through transformations. You can automate those transformations using the Advanced Editor. It will allow you to combine multiple tables into a pivot table. To use multiple tables together, you have to put them all in a data model, which is a container. Once you have your data in the data model, you need to create relationships And once you have those relationships, you can use fields from different tables. What's the best way to learn Power Query Editor and Power Pivot? Practice. Use it. If you want the Northwind data set, you can Google it, or you can email me and I'll send it to you. They will definitely reward any effort you put into learning them. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and I hope you enjoyed the gifts.